Good evening. We'd like everyone to take their seats. We're ready to begin. We are here at another event, Beit and Times of Israel presents, and we're happy to. You can't hear me. Now can you hear me? Great. Okay. So good evening. Beit and Times of Israel presents. It's happy to host this evening Professor Aumann, Nobel Prize winner. It's an honor to have you here with us, Professor. Definitely. This is a time also if you could make sure your phones are silenced. We all want to listen to Professor Aumann's story and not to phones ringing. So this is the time to do this. If you notice, our next event on January 15th, we'll be hosting Professor Ali Shalvi, who will be talking about her biography. So please make sure to get your tickets on time. You don't want to miss out on that also. Matthew Kalman, Professor Aumann, b'kasha.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Kalman. I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of Beit Avichai and the Times of Israel. Our guest tonight, when he was in high school, was given some very sound careers advice. They said to him, Aumann, you're very good with your hands. You should think about becoming an auto mechanic or a cabinet maker. But whatever you do, don't do anything to do with maths or teaching. In 2005, when he was awarded the Nobel Prize for Economics together with another colleague, he said at the press conference, my research, what I've discovered is obvious. I have no idea why they've given me the Nobel Prize, but I won't appeal. It's confusing reading about our guest tonight because he has at least 4 different names. His family call him Robert John. His academic papers are in the name of Robert. His colleagues call him Bob. And here in Israel, he's known as Yisrael. I'm just going to stay with Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Yisrael Aumann. Good evening. Have those 4 names ever caused you any problems? Do you ever forget which one you're using?
Okay. There was the one time I was moonlighting in Tel Aviv University. My regular job was at the Hebrew University here in this town, and but to make a little extra money, I did moonlighting in Tel Aviv University. And there was once a problem with the paycheck or the loksh, the slip, and they wanted to know what my name is. So my given name, family name is Aumann, but what's the given name? So I didn't know exactly what it is in Tel Aviv, so I called my wife and I said, Esther, what's my name in Tel Aviv?
Now, you were born in Frankfurt in Germany in 1930. You left there when you were 8 years old.
That's correct.
What are your memories of growing up in Nazi Germany?
Well, actually they weren't too bad. I had a wonderful childhood altogether, also in Germany and also later. But my memories are not they're not very painful personally. We left before Kristallnacht on Tisha B'Av in 1938, and we children didn't suffer too much. Yes, I think once or twice we were beaten up on the way to school by young Nazi hoodlums, but that didn't really make us. It didn't really affect our lives by too much. I have basically good memories from that period. The few memories that I have are mostly in the family, the synagogue, in the school, which was a Jewish school. But there is one thing that stands out, or actually two things that stand out very, very starkly. One is the signs on the stores, which were printed with a beige or light brown background, and lettering, German lettering that was made to resemble Hebrew letters. The font was made to resemble Hebrew letters. And the content of the sign was, Juden sind hier unerwünscht, which means Jews are not welcome in this store, okay? Jews are not welcome. And that stands out in my memory, those signs. Another thing that stands out in my memory is a discussion I had with my brother, an older brother. He passed away about 1.5 years ago. He's 4 years older than me. And this conversation took place after the Anschluss. The Anschluss was when Germany, how does one say, annexed, thank you very much. I'm forgetting my English when I haven't quite learned Hebrew yet. When Germany annexed Austria, the next day there was a plebiscite, a mish'al am, asking for approval of this move. And the rabbi of our community voted no. Jews were allowed to vote. Even in 1938, they were citizens, and the Nazis gave them a lot of trouble, but they were allowed to vote. They were still German citizens. And the rabbi voted no. So he was arrested. Well, you could ask, how did the government know that he voted no with secret voting? Well, that's not a question in Nazi Germany. They knew, okay? He voted no, and he was arrested and sent to a concentration camp. He was released after a few days, but for a while he was imprisoned. Now, my brother and I discussed this. The Jewish community was aghast, but my brother and I was not yet 8, and my brother was not yet 12. We discussed this, and we agreed that the rabbi had this coming to him. He deserved to be arrested. Why did he deserve to be arrested, in our view? Not because it was stupid of him to vote no, but because one is supposed to vote yes. This was the thing to do. And therefore, if he voted no, it was a sort of a misdemeanor, a crime, and he should be arrested. 2 Jewish children in Nazi Germany, were so much affected by what's going on around them, the whole narrative around them, that even though we were Jewish children and we were being persecuted and we had the signs saying Jews are not welcome in the store and being beaten up on the way to school, even that, thinking back to it, it's amazing, but we Jewish children, that's what we thought.
So your parents saw the writing on the wall and they realized that you had to leave Germany. And how was that experience of having to leave your country? Did you have to escape? Did you have to go and hide? Did you have to smuggle yourselves out? How did you
No. We got a visa an immigrant visa to the United States, very, very official, and we took the train from Frankfurt, and we traveled to Belgium, to Ostend, and we took the ferry to England. And in England, we spent 2 weeks with my mother's family, and then we took a ship from Southampton to New York, and that was it. I might say that we traveled first class. Now, on the ship, not in the train, we traveled second class. There were 3 classes in trains at that time: first, second, and third. We didn't travel third class, we traveled second class on trains. But in the ship, we traveled first class. Why? Well, my parents were fairly well-to-do, but we couldn't take any money out of Germany. You could take things out. We bought a piano and took it out. And a beautiful Steinway piano, we still have it. I still have it, and it's an amazing piano. And you could buy things and you could buy ship tickets, but you couldn't take out any capital. So once we got out of the first class ship in the United States, in New York, we didn't have anything. We had no money, and my parents really had to work very, very hard. My father held down 2 jobs, my mother held down 3 jobs, and she worked. Both my parents worked very, very hard. But we had a beautiful childhood in New York also. We bought cracked eggs because they were cheaper than whole eggs, but they were eggs. They were okay. And we had a wonderful childhood. I might tell a little anecdote about this. To get the American visas, at that time one had to know about the United States. One had to know about the history of the United States and current affairs and this and that. And so my parents studied for this examination that the consul gave them. And I saw that they were studying, so I said, I also want to study. So my mother said, very well, and she gave me stuff to study. And then we came to the consul in Stuttgart, and he examined my parents, and they passed the test. And then my mother said to him, look, this child, I think I was not yet 8, has studied also. Please ask him some questions, make him happy. So the consul said, very good. And he asked me, who is the President of the United States? So I said, Rosenfeld. And we got the visas.
So you arrive in New York, a little German boy transplanted from Frankfurt. You're living in New York City, in Manhattan, I think, at first.
Yeah, the first half year we lived on the Upper West Side in Manhattan, yeah.
And so what kind of schoolboy were you? Were you already shining when you started school in America?
That first half year, I think, was pretty good. We went to public school 87 because there were no Jewish schools in Manhattan. That is still one of the best public schools in the United States. PS 87 in Upper West Side. Still to this day, 70 years later, 80 years later. It's almost exactly 80 years later. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. This was 38, and now we have 18. It's 80 years later. Yeah. Okay.
Time flies.
That's right. So there I was okay, I think. By the way, one of my classmates in PS 87 was Naomi Goldstein, Naomi Ne Goldstein, who is now Naomi Shal Yashuv Cohen, the widow of the chief rabbi of Haifa. but she was one of my classmates, so now I'm giving away her age. Okay. So that was okay, but then I went to elementary school in Borough Park. My parents decided to move to Borough Park in Brooklyn, which, because there were no Jewish schools in Manhattan, none, no, not even in Washington Heights, nowhere. No Jewish schools in Manhattan in 1938. So we moved to Borough Park, where there were 2 Jewish schools, and we went to one of them, Eitz Chaim. Some of you in the audience may know, but remember it. Some of the older people in the audience. I can't see anybody, by the way. Nobody, nothing. It's black. There I was a pretty good student until the 8th grade. In the 8th grade, I somehow, let me confess the truth, in the 8th grade, I didn't even make honorable mention on graduation. In graduation, there's the, what's it called, the valedictorian, and then there's a silver medal, and then approximately one third of the class, about 10 kids, get honorable mention. And I didn't even make that. So I was in the bottom 2/3 of the class. Well, that's it. Okay.
So how did you go from being a mediocre elementary school student to becoming interested in maths in high school?
In high school, I became interested in Gemara and in math, both. I had excellent teachers in both in math and in Gemara. I was captivated by both of them. And the reason that I became interested in those 2 subjects was the good teachers. Yeah, well, that's it. The inspiring teachers that took a personal interest in you and so on. The teaching is very, very important, very important.
So when you got to the end of high school, you were faced with a dilemma, I guess, a choice between Gemara on the one hand and maths on the other. And I understand that you actually tried to do both for a while.
I tried to do both for about half a year. I went to City College in New York. I know there's an English-speaking audience, so some of you may know New York. There's an institution called City College, 139th Street and Convent Avenue. And this was free. That's why I went there. No charge, no tuition charge. I used to get up at 5:30, 5:45 in the morning, and take the subway for an hour and a quarter to City College and take a class, and then take the subway back down to the Lower East Side, where I stayed in the yeshiva and studied Gemara, and then take the subway back up to City College, and then get home at about 10 o'clock and do some homework, and then go to bed, and then get up again. It's something that I was able to do barely for half a year, but then I decided I can't do this anymore, and I had to make a decision. And it was a difficult decision, but I decided on math, yes, after. It was I really, I just want to say, agonized over it. But that's it.
What was it that attracted you to maths?
The teacher, yes.
What about the subject attracted you?
I don't know. I mean, it's just, it's beautiful stuff. What should I tell you? Yes. What attracted me to my wife? A beautiful woman, yes. So, what attracted me to math? It's a beautiful subject. I mean, it really is beautiful. I can describe what math is, but I don't, it's sort of a formal, logical thinking. the formal part is less important. It's precise. That's a better word than formal. Precise logical thinking, but very deep, very involved, and I don't know. It's a sort of an art, an art. That's what it is. But I don't know why that attracted me more, let's say, than biology or Gemara for that matter. Yes, or whatever. Why this thing? I don't know why.
Now
that is. Akashia Famaisa, we say in Yiddish. Yes.
That careers advice that you ignored.
Yeah, right.
May have robbed us of a great auto mechanic or cabinet maker, but they said you were very good with your hands and they wanted you to do something practical. Was there anything practical that you saw with the maths? Were you gonna use this for anything in the real world?
No.
Nothing.
No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not. In fact, in fact, the vogue at that time, in mid-century, in the last century, the middle of the last century, the vogue was the less useful, the better. Okay. Yes. There was a very famous great mathematician by the name of Hardy, Godfrey Harold Hardy, a British mathematician, who in old age he said, "There's only one thing that I regret in my life, and that is that I once worked out a formula in genetics which became very useful." So so the less useful, the better. And I was attracted by that vogue. As an undergraduate, I read a lot of number theory, which was at that time absolutely useless. It was beautiful stuff, but absoltly useless.
And you went on to study knots, right?
Yes.
Knot theory.
Let me get there. Yes. As a graduate student, I got into what's called knot theory. I did my doctoral thesis in knot theory, and in the theory of knots, like you have in a tie. Okay. Knots, K-N-O-T. And the reason I got into this was, first of all, it's very the questions that one asks in knot theory are very natural. Second of all, they're natural. You could describe them to a school child, and he would understand the problem. But there's no way he would understand the solution. The solutions are very, very deep. Okay, and those were the two items that attracted me: the naturalness of the questions, and the depth and the beauty of the solutions, of the answers. And the third thing was that it was absolutely useless. So this vogue had gotten to me.
And did it remain absolutely useless?
Well, let me tell you this. I was sitting in my apartment alone. The idea for my doctoral thesis, I worked out the thesis, and it was, as I say, deep and complicated. But the basic idea, the main idea, I was struggling with for months. And I was standing once in a shower in Princeton in October of 1954. I was taking a shower for about half an hour. That's where one gets the really good ideas. And then I hit on the idea in the shower, and that enabled me to complete my thesis. So 50 years pass, October 04, exactly 50 years later, okay? I'm sitting in my apartment alone, because my first wife had died and I had not yet married my second wife. And the phone rings, and on the phone is my grandson, who is studying medicine in Beersheba. And he says to me, "Grandpa, what are linking numbers? What is that, linking numbers?" So I say, "What do you mean linking numbers? You mean like a knot theory?" He says, "Yes." He says, "Why are you interested in linking numbers?" So he says, "Well, we had a lecture on knot theory today in the medical school of Beersheba, and the lecturer explained linking numbers to us, and I didn't understand what he was saying. I don't think he understood either." So I said to him, "Why are they teaching knot theory in the medical school in Beersheba? What is knot theory? Is this sort of a course outside, an extracurricular course to get?" So he said, "No, it's needed. It's needed in medicine." I said, "What is it needed for?" So he said, "Sometimes the DNA, which is, like a string, in a cell gets knotted up, and depending on the properties of the knot, from the knot theoretic point of view, this can cause problems like cancer or other problems, and we have to know the linking numbers and so on." So I had to sit down, and catch my breath. The stuff that I was doing exactly 50 years before, because it was useless, was now being taught in the second year of medical school in Beersheba.
The best laid plans. So you go through graduate school, and then you do your doctorate. You're at Princeton, I think, doing your doctorate.
No, I did the doctorate in MIT.
MIT, sorry, MIT.
Princeton was a postdoc.
Postdoc.
Yeah.
And I think it's at MIT that you first met John Nash.
That's right. Yeah.
And people in the audience may remember John Nash because there was a movie a few years ago with Russell Crowe.
A Beautiful Mind.
A Beautiful Mind. So that was John Nash. Was he crazy when you met him?
No.
No, okay.
He was, what's the word? I'm forgetting my English. He was ebullient, one might say, yes, okay. But not crazy. No, he was perfectly with it.
And that was the first time you encountered game theory, I understand.
That's right, yeah.
But at the time, it didn't interest you very much.
No, it didn't. I didn't catch on to it. It didn't hook me. No, right.
But I've heard you say also that actually the person who introduced you to game theory was your mother.
Oh, right. Okay, fine. Yeah, right.
Which might be a good way of explaining what game theory is.
Well, game theory, like economics, some people say that game theory is a branch of economics. I think that economics is a branch of game theory. But Jim Tobin, who was awarded the Nobel Prize for Economics in I think in 1984. He was a macroeconomist, and I was present at a sort of a powwow of senior graduate students and faculty at Yale University. Jim was at Yale, and he was asked, "Can you describe economics in one word?" Economics in one word, just one word to describe economics. He said yes, and that word is incentives. Yeah, economics revolves around incentives, and game theory as a little more, but also a very major part of game theory is incentives. And what you want to do in game theory and in economics is you want to give people incentives to do what is good for you. Okay? If they're going to follow their incentives, then that means it's good for them also. So you're striving to a win-win situation, but you have to devise the incentives to make them do what's good for you, and since they're doing it as a result of incentives, it's good for them also. And my mother realized this, yes. She had not heard Jim Tobin. This was before his time. But she realized this. So as I told you, in New York, in Brooklyn, we were not well off, okay? We had a beautiful childhood, my brother and I, but my parents worked very hard. They were not well off. But sometimes there was a treat that my mother got to divide between the two children. So what she would do is, let's say, take a candy bar and break it in two and give Moshe, my brother, Alav Shalom, one part, and me another part. And quite frequently, there would be dissatisfaction on the part of at least one of us. Yes? Okay? Maybe both, yes. But at least one would say, not fair, the other child got the larger part. And my mother, it saddened her because she gave us the treat and so that we should be happy and not so that we should cry and be dissatisfied. So she devised a way for overcoming this through incentives. What did she do? She took the candy bar and she gave it to me. And she said, Johnny, okay, you divide it into two parts, and then Moshe will pick one part. Okay, and that's it. So Moshe obviously couldn't complain because he chose the part, so he had no ground for complaint. But also, I couldn't complain because she had given me an incentive to divide it as equally as I could according to my judgment, okay? So if it's equal according to my judgment, then I can't complain, right? So she had given me the right incentive. She knew about game theory.
So basically, it's your mother who should have got the Nobel Prize.
I think you're entirely right, and I think people who know my mother, who knew my mother, would agree with that. There might be some people in the audience who still remember my mother. One of the things she did in New York was to sell an encyclopedia. It was called Compton's Pictured Encyclopedia, an encyclopedia for children. And the way she did it was, she gave herself an incentive. The way she did it was, she decided she was going to become a salesman for an encyclopedia, a children's encyclopedia. And then she did research to find out what is the best encyclopedia for children available in the United States. Not what is considered the best, but what is the best, okay? And she found that Compton's was the best, and she said, now I'm going to try to sell Compton's, because then I can actually put all my heart in the sales spiel. Okay? And she was an extraordinary lady in many ways. She taught us children. She took us out of town and she showed us the sky, and she gave us the names of the constellations, and we went along the streets of Borough Park, and she said, this is a Norway maple, and this is an oak tree, and so on and so forth. And I remember she said when I was around 12 or maybe 11 or 12, she said, Johnny, it's time you started reading seriously. So we took the Dickens's Tale of Two Cities, and we read it together for several weeks. Once or twice a week, we read it together. And then the story gripped me, and I raced ahead with it. And I've been reading, well, I would like to say I've been reading ever since, but I haven't. In the last few years, I've been reading less. I still read some fiction, but less than I used to. Yeah.
So you move on to your postdoc at Princeton, and you've learned all this useless theory, and then you get presented with a real live problem, which is very practical, very useful indeed, and it's all about aerial bombardment, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, this was the height of the Cold War. Some of the people in the room may remember that there was a period of tension between the Soviet Union and the United States, which extended from about 1946 until 1989, 1990, a period of over 40 years where there was a lot of tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. This was called the Cold War. And both sides developed nuclear weapons. And I was working, for the postdoc, I was working with an operations research consulting firm. Operations research is a very, very practical branch of mathematics. And I was assigned we were doing consulting for real businesses and the United States Armed Forces. This problem was a problem that was raised by Bell Telephone Laboratories. They were developing a ground-to-air missile, and we were asked what happens if there is a large squadron of aircraft, some of which are carrying nuclear weapons. There weren't too many nuclear bombs around at that time, yes. So you had to be careful with the quantities. But some of the problem that was posed was, suppose there's a squadron of aircraft which is approaching you. Most of them are dummies. They're not carrying anything. But some of them are carrying nuclear weapons. How do you deal with this from the point of view of a ground-to-air missile? So I was given this problem to analyze, and I realized immediately that this is what Nash had been talking with me about. This is game theory. So I read up a little bit, and I did a game theoretic analysis, and I wrote a report. But then the subject gripped me, okay. Then the subject gripped me, and the rest is history, one might say.
Well, it's economics rather than history.
It's economics,
right.
yes.
But why is it called game theory? I mean, you're dealing with nuclear bombardment and very serious issues. We'll talk about more of them in a second, but why game theory? It's not a game. It's real life.
It's a situation where where the players, one might say, okay, the players are striving to they are interacting with each other, and they're striving to different goals. And that is what characterizes a game from the mathematical viewpoint, like in chess, okay? White wants to win and black wants to win, and what white does affects what black's ability to win, okay? And what black does affects white's ability, and that is, from the strategic point of view, from the planning point of view, a game is a situation like the one I was talking about is like chess. Yes, the bombers want their bombs to be effective, and the Nike missile wants to shoot down the planes which have the nuclear weapons, and it's the goals of the participants, right? We call the participants players. The goals of the participants are different, okay? In chess, they are exactly opposite. In the bombing situation, they're not exactly opposite, but they're almost exactly opposite. But we also have games like selling a house, okay? So there also the participants they're striving to different goals. Both want the transaction to take place, so the goals are not opposite, but the seller wants a higher price and the buyer wants a lower price, okay? So the goals are not the same. They're different.
So how do you apply...
from the strategic point of view, chess, which is certainly a game, is quite similar to something like the bombing operation or the house selling operation.
So can you give us a quick game theory class as applied to buying a house?
Okay. When you're buying a house, I think one of this is maybe you don't have to be a game theorist. Like you said before, you know, I was really I really thought that I shouldn't get the Nobel Prize, but I wasn't going to appeal. Okay, so what I'm going to say now is also going to be pretty obvious. If you're a buyer, yes, you don't want to effuse about the house when you are looking at the house and the seller is there, and you want to express an interest, okay? Otherwise, the seller won't pay any attention to you. But you want to keep it muted, okay? You don't want to give the seller the impression that you are really crazy about the house. It has a beautiful view and high ceilings and a beautiful garden and so on and so forth. You don't want to really emphasize all those points. That's pretty obvious, right? Okay, but that's game theory, okay? That's because why don't you want to do that? Because you're giving him then an incentive to ask for a higher price. All right? Okay.
Okay. All right. I'm going to use that next time I buy a house and see what happens. Meanwhile, in the background, you've become a Zionist. Your family wasn't Zionist to begin with, I don't think. How did that change occur?
How did that change occur? Well, I think in the post-war period, the post-Second World War, period, the struggle of the Yishuv, the people living in Palestine. By the way, I want to say something about Palestine.
Sure.
Can I say something?
Sure.
It's not to the point of your question, but people talk all the time about Palestine and Palestinians and so on, especially Palestinians. Now, the moment you say Palestinian, you've given away the game. There was a sign in Bet Belgia, the faculty club in Givat Ram, the Givat Ram campus of the university. There's a faculty club called Bet Belgia. And there was a sign there saying, "Have you ever met a Palestinian?" So I wrote on the sign, I said, if not, we can arrange a meeting with a Palestinian. So I wrote on the sign, sure, I've met a Palestinian. My wife is a Palestinian, yes? She's sitting right there, by the way. I can see her, I can see nobody else. Yes. My wife is a Palestinian. She has Palestinian identity papers. Palestine, during the times of the Mandate, the coins, the money, the coins had written on them it was written Palestine in English, and in Arabic was written Palestine, and in Hebrew on the same side of the coin was written Eretz Yisrael. So Palestine is Eretz Yisrael. That's what it is. Yeah. When you say Palestinian, you're saying they're the natives. They belong here. We're Jews. We don't belong here. Okay? We're colonialists. That's what we're saying. So I object to the use of the word Palestinian. You want to say it's not very enthusiastic. Come on. Okay. You want to say Arab Palestinian? Fine. Jewish Palestinian? Fine. Okay? But not just Palestinian. Okay? There are Arab Palestinians and Jewish Palestinians, and I'm married to a Jewish Palestinian. So that's as far as Palestine is concerned. Yeah. Now, what was your question?
My question, which is now irrelevant, obviously, but we'll come back to politics a bit later. But I was just asking you, I mean, you came from basically a Haredi German Orthodox family.
Oh, right. What made me change?
What made you change?
Well, the struggle for the state, the struggle against the British, on the part of the Irgun and on the part of the Stern Gang, we called it, and on the part of the Haganah, the struggle for the state by the Jewish, the struggle against the British, really. It was a struggle against the British more than a struggle for the state. This seized our imagination. Sitting in New York, reading the newspapers, listening to the radio, it seized our imagination, and we were converted from anti-Zionism to Zionism, okay? And my brother and I made a determination to make our lives in Israel. This was in the period from 45, 46, after the war, to 48. And I remember the 29th of November, 1947, when the United Nations determined on the partition plan and determined on the creation of the State of Israel. It was a very emotional moment for me. And also the creation of the state, yes. By the way, let me tell you a story about the creation of the state. until the actual day of that the state was created, yes, May 15th, 1948, it was not known what the Jewish state would be called, yes. Some people thought it would be Judea. I think Israel was also mentioned, but the name was not obvious and it was not known. It was not clearly known. And the story went around that there was a meeting of the Jewish agency, the government in the shadow government of the state to come, where the name of the state was discussed, what the state would be called, the new nation, what it would be called. So somebody suggested Irving, but that was rejected because it sounds too Jewish.
So you and your brother both decided to come and live in Irving. He came in 1950, I think.
He came in 1950.
How did your parents feel about that?
They felt fine, no problem.
They become converted as well?
They became converted as well. My mother came to Israel in 1957, 1 year after me. My father died in 1954, so he didn't make it. He died in New York. But my mother actually followed us to Israel in 57. We came in 56, my wife and I. Yeah.
And what was it like arriving in Israel in 56? What was it like for you? It wasn't quite the same then as it is now. And the contrast.
Well, there was one traffic light in Jerusalem. One. It was at the corner of King George and Yafo, okay? And it didn't work. Right. So there's one difference. Also, there were sheep grazing in the Emek HaMatzleva, and it was a little different. It wasn't as big as it is now, but you know, I lived through this gradually all the time. The changes were gradual, and I can't tell you. I can't sort of, aside of that one traffic light, I can't really point at some specific things. What should I tell you? I remember, not just in Jerusalem, I remember we got a car relatively early. By the way, we didn't have a car until the last day almost, or the last week, in which it was possible to buy a car given our rights as Olim Chadashim, okay? So in a way that the government was giving the wrong incentives that way, yes? In other words, if it would have extended the time, then we might not have gotten a car until now, although I think that's unlikely, but they actually were giving, by cutting off, it's an example of incentives, by cutting off the time when you are allowed to use your rights, they actually gave an incentive, they motivated us to buy the car. Now, although we had to scrape together the money for it or whatever.
So you came here, you started doing your research, by this time you're committed, as it were, to game theory and continuing with that. And going on in the background of all this is the Cold War. Yeah. And people like Thomas Schelling and others are deeply involved in policy making. Right. In the United States. So in what way did you see game theory actually being used in policy making during the Cold War?
Well, game theory was really the background it was the backbone, not background, the backbone of policy in the Cold War period. I mean, Kissinger, okay, was a game theorist. Kissinger, before he became Secretary of State of the United States, when he was still a professor at Harvard. By the way, let me tell a story, an aside about Kissinger. He came to Washington, became Secretary of State, and he left Harvard University. And somebody asked him when he was in Washington, somebody asked him, Henry, what do you need all this trouble for? You're going to government, becoming Secretary of State, all these struggles that you have over here. And Harvard is so nice. Why did you leave Harvard? He said, I couldn't stand the politics. Kissinger was a game theorist. In 1961, in the fall of 1961, in the academic year 60-61, I spent at Princeton, which was the center of game theory at the time, the world center of game theory. And we held a conference, a game theory conference in October of 61. And one of the main speakers was Kissinger, okay? So, and there was Herman Kahn, and all these people, they described, they used game theory to shape U.S. policy. Young Schelling, who died a couple of years ago, he shared the Nobel Prize with me. He was one of the main architects of Cold War policy. Let me give you an example of that, okay? In 60-61, really, in that period, there was a craze of building fallout shelters in the United States. I don't think, aside of the people who actually lived through it, I don't know how, whether many of you know exactly how serious the Cold War was. It was very, very serious. People were very afraid. At the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, I thought that the world would end in 3 weeks, yes, not in climate change in 50 years or 100 years. In 3 weeks, the world would end. It was very scary stuff, very scary. But so let me describe just one aspect of it. There was this craze of building fallout shelters in the United States. People built out of concrete fallout shelters near their homes or in their backyard. They invested thousands of dollars in them. Fallout is radioactive fallout, okay? You go in the shelter, you're somewhat protected from the radioactive fallout. And they stocked them with food and with machine guns in order to keep not the Russians but the neighbors out. And that's the truth, yeah. And now this was taken as a very aggressive move by the Russians, and it fomented a crisis. How did it foment a crisis? How can building a fallout shelter? Can you tell me why this is aggressive?
No.
Okay, so I'll tell you why it's aggressive. I'll tell you why it's aggressive, and this is game theory, okay? It's not very deep, but it's game theory. It's an example. If it's very deep, I won't be able to explain it to you, okay? So the reason that it's aggressive is because the Russians saw this as an attempt by the Americans to build up their defenses against an attack by the Russians. And that means that they will be able to withstand a second strike. Okay? A second strike would come as a response to what? To a first strike by the Americans. So they were building up their ability to make a first strike, yes, because they were building the defenses against the second strike by the Russians. Okay? That's game theory. Simple.
Yeah. I should tell the audience that we spoke before, and I said that one of the challenges that you were going to have tonight, perhaps the greatest challenge of your career, would be to be able to explain game theory so that someone as stupid as me could understand it. And I think you've passed. Thank you. The specific thing which was noted when the Nobel Prize was awarded in 2005 as being your great contribution was something called the folk theorem. And that, as far as I understand, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, is when you have game theory, which applies to the way that people interact when they are trying to achieve different things and they have to interact with each other. That's where game theory comes into play.
Right, very good.
And the folk theorem is what happens when those games are played not once, but many times. They're repeated. And therefore you build up not just a relationship over one game, you build up a relationship over time. And that then creates a different outcome according to game theory, because of the way that you interact repeatedly. Am I right so far?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, let me interject another remark. Since you asked, am I right so far? There's this person who jumped from the 106th floor of the World Trade Center, Oliver Sholem, and as he was passing the 80th floor, somebody shouted to him from one of the windows, "How's it going?" So he answered, "So far, so good."
Thank you. So my question, this is the scariest thing I've ever done, okay? So my question is, what does the folk theorem say about the way that changes the way that people interact over those repeated games? And can you give us another practical example?
Well, yeah, the folk theorem says that it makes them more cooperative. You know, it makes cooperation more feasible.
Why?
Why? Well, we have an intuitive feeling for this. Okay, you'd rather cooperate with a person that you've known for a long time. If you want to buy, you're willing to go to your neighborhood grocery and to buy a bottle of milk or some cheese from him and not worry too much about whether it's spoiled, and he's willing to give you credit, okay, and not worry too much about whether you're going to pay him back, right? And that's because we have an intuitive feeling that's because you know him very well and you trust each other, okay? Now, but the folk theorem is actually a mathematical formulation of that principle, and it says the reason that you trust each other is not just something psychological or genetic or something that he's friendly and you love him or something like that. It's no. If you have a long-term relationship and you cooperate, then if you keep cooperating, if you don't double-cross each other along the way, then you stand to gain all the time. But if my neighborhood grocer would give me spoiled milk or sell me, or I would not pay my bills from him, he would stop giving me those, he would stop giving me credit, and I would stop buying milk from him. Okay, so we have a so to speak, a punishment, a possible punishment lies in the background, and that's why we don't think of it in those terms, but that's why we do cooperate, because if we don't cooperate if I don't cooperate with the grocer, then the grocer won't cooperate with me and we'll both be worse off, okay? But that's in the background. Actually, when I give him the money, when I take credit from him, or when I buy the goods from him, we don't think of it in those terms. But that explains the behavior, one might say, evolutionarily. Okay.
So the cooperation
Yes.
is based on an unconscious realization that in the background there's punishment.
There might be punishment if you don't.
There might be punishment.
There's a threat of punishment.
So there's kind of a balance of fear that creates the cooperation.
It's strange to think of going to the grocery as a balance of fear.
Hey.
But yeah, that's it. The balance of fear. Okay.
So which brings us straight back to the nuclear standoff between America and the Soviet Union.
Yes.
So basically, the whole of the Cold War was all about buying a pint of milk.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So, how do you apply that kind of thinking and those kind of lessons to our situation here in the Middle East?
We're doing a lot of things wrong here. We're doing a lot of things wrong. I try to emphasize the importance of incentives, okay? I think in many ways we're also incentives and also signaling. Let me, when we're striving for peace, okay, we all want peace, I think. All of us in this room, anyway, I want peace. The question is how to achieve peace with the Palestinian Arabs, okay? How to achieve peace with them. And I think Mr. Allmart, I was once at a conference with him in Petra in Jordan, and he said, we're tired of war, we have to, we're tired of struggling. We all the time say out loud, we want peace, we need peace, we love peace. Yes, I say it to you. Don't let it out of this room. But I think that this is not a good approach. It's like the person who wants to buy a house, okay? We were talking about that before. He wants to buy a house, and he says to the seller, "What a beautiful view this is. And you have such good sides. You're facing south and no north facing, and the sun is beautiful, and the ceilings are high, and there's a wonderful garden," and so on and so forth. Yes, it's not the way to lower the price. Okay, so when you shout peace, peace all the time, you are giving a signal to the other side to up the price. Yes, they want peace. They'll have to pay for it by leaving. That's if they want peace, they can leave. Okay. The expulsion from the Gaza Strip, which was already ancient history, is 13 years ago, but this was a very, very bad move, because what they said, what we said to them was, you just have to give us, put enough pressure on us, and we'll capitulate. Now that's not really true. We won't capitulate all the way after a lot of pressure, but we are giving that signal, and the other side is buying it. And I think the worst is the indoctrination that they get all the time, that we have to push the Jews out altogether. And they get this in school. And at the time of the Oslo Agreement, there was an item in the agreement saying that there will be no more incitement in the schools, but was a dead letter from the beginning. We did not insist on that. We should have insisted on that. But we are giving them incentives to press on, to keep on with the struggle all the time. We think that it's common wisdom or common foolishness that making, how does one say it? How does you say it in English? Concessions, okay. That making concessions and making it will bring about peace. Making concessions doesn't bring about peace. It brings about war. It's the opposite. The exit, the expulsion from the Gaza Strip brought all the wars that we've had in the Gaza Strip since then, and culminating in the last one. We had the Amud Anan, and we had I've forgotten all the names. Yes. But we've had far more people killed than before, and because we are giving them incentives to keep pressing. They say if we are rewarding their moves. We are rewarding their attacks by, and this brings about a war. It doesn't bring peace.
So we could do with a Kissinger running policy.
In principle, yes. I don't know whether Kissinger was that good, but in principle, if you mean a game theorist statesman, yes, absolutely.
Okay, we're going to move to some questions from the audience. I'm sure people have some in 1 minute, but I just want to ask you one other thing. You're a man of science, of logic. You love useless theorems and their beauty. At the same time, you're a deeply religious man. Do you ever find...
Let's say religious.
Okay. Do you ever find those two worlds, those two ways of thinking, do you ever find them in conflict?
No. You want me to explain why?
Yes, please. Yeah.
It'll take up the whole question.
Because you mentioned evolution just before.
Yeah, right.
And there's a tension between Judaism and the theory of evolution. Many people feel, but how does that balance in your thinking and in your way of life?
But if you ask about evolution specifically, I don't see any tension in it with the Torah way of thinking. God created the world, and he had to use some tools. Yes, if you say God built a table, yes, he needs a hammer and nails to build a table, even if he's God. Yeah, right. Okay. So you need tools. Evolution is the tool that we use to create the living world. There's no problem there. But I think it's a deep subject, and it's a subject for another New York, Israel Times, Jerusalem Times.
Times of Israel.
Times of Israel. It's a subject for another Times of Israel Bet Avichai forum. I'll be delighted to talk about it, but just very, very, very not too enthusiastic. Very briefly. Yeah, okay. Very briefly. There are different ways of looking at the world, and they can all be valid. Just like there are different ways that painters look at the world, and they're all valid. Okay, let me give some examples. There is very realistic painting like of Tizian or Rembrandt. They're so-called realistic, yes. And there's also the painting of El Greco, which is looks a little non-realistic, but that's the way El Greco saw things, yes. And there's the painting of Van Gogh. Some of you may have seen this painting of the night sky with the moon and the shining stars, and the stars shine very, very brightly. It's not the way a photograph would turn out, yes. Now, these are ways of looking at the world, of perceiving the world, and the Torah way of perceiving the world is different from the scientific way of perceiving the world. It's different, but it's no less valid, okay? It's no less valid. I think at the bottom of this is the idea that both science and Torah way of looking at the world they are in our minds. They're not out there in the real world. It's our perceptions of these things that we're talking about, and the different perceptions can be simultaneously valid. We can look at El Greco and at Rembrandt and at Tizian, Van Gogh, Picasso, Matisse, Cezanne. We can look at all those, and they have different styles, they have different ways of doing things, different ways of depicting things, but they don't contradict each other. Yes, they are different. But it really is a topic which you can't talk about on it's some of you may find my answers unsatisfactory, but I beg you not to ask about this, because it's not something that can be answered in 5 minutes. Half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, okay, but not 2 minutes.
Okay. All right, thank you. If we could have the lights up and some people to help us with the microphones, that would be good. Right? See, they were there all the time. If you could put your hand up. We are, so if we could take the first question just down here. This is being live streamed on the web, so please don't talk until you have the microphone in your hand, because not only will we not be able to hear you, but the people watching it online won't be able to hear you. And also, if you could please speak slowly and clearly, because Professor Aumann's hearing is not fantastic, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi. 2 questions that has nothing to do with math. You have escaped from the Nazis. You moved to New York. You gave us our whole history. How do you compare yourself to the situation now of the immigrants coming in from Mexico? And number 2, as a religious man,
The immigrants coming into Mexico?
from Mexico into the United States, how do you compare those times from your time to now of the immigration?
Let's take them one at a time, okay?
Okay.
Would you like to answer?
Immigrants coming from Mexico to the United States.
How do you compare it to your situation coming from
Well, it's a little different, I think. I'm sorry. It's a little different. I mean, our lives were threatened, okay? I'm not sure whether somebody is threatening the lives of Mexicans coming into the United States. I actually didn't know that there were a lot of Mexicans coming into the United States. I don't follow the American news that carefully. Is there some kind of big wave of Mexicans coming into the United States? Yeah, I didn't know that. But our lives were threatened, yes, and this was serious stuff, yes, in 1938. So I don't see a big similarity there.
Okay, you had another question?
My other question is, recently there was that horrible killing, slaughter in Squirrel Hill, Pittsburgh, and a rabbi here refused to recognize that this shul temple was a synagogue. And I was interested in what your take on a rabbi not acknowledging.
You know what? I'm actually going to cut you off there, if you
Okay.
don't mind, because I don't think Professor Aumann has actually referred to any of that during his talk here. I don't really think it's the subject that he's even qualified to speak about. So I'm going to, could you please keep your questions relevant to the things we've discussed this evening? That would be great. Please.
First, I would like to say that I think most of us are totally riveted here. Listening to you speak, your manner, what you say is just a pleasure for all of us.
I have to see the person who's talking.
I'm here.
Just here in a minute.
Here.
Oh, okay. Well, could you repeat
My
your
question-
question?
Nice to you.
I just
okay.
gave you.
It's okay. Question, please.
I just gave you a
That's why I'm
compliment.
asking
I
to
gave you a
repeat it.
compliment. My question is your take on the Israeli approach to the agreements with the Palestinians to find a solution with the Palestinians is very valid. Has anybody spoken to you about consulting to the government?
The government doesn't ask me a lot of questions. And I think once they actually asked me something, and I gave them advice, and for a year or two it seemed that they were listening to my advice, but then they did the opposite. So that was the Shalit affair. So I'm not sure that I have a tremendous amount of influence on the government. I do admit to keeping the government alive. Yeah, okay. Okay.
Hi. Over here. Okay. So the game theoretic approach that you work on is a theoretical approach that models humans as rational actors. And my question is that in real world situations where we're dealing with humans who aren't necessarily rational according to the economic definitions, is this theoretical approach really the best approach to take, or is it better to use more empirical sort of historical approaches, especially when considering politics? Maybe it's better to sort of look at history and similar conflicts as opposed to sort of modeling it from the ground up from a mathematical approach. So I was wondering if you had a take on that, and if you had any counterexamples where game theory was not really a good model for political conflict.
It's up to you to bring a counterexample, but I think that game theory is based on the assumption that people are rational, which means in game theory, in economics, the definition of rationality is that people pursue their goals as best they can given their information. And I think most people pursue their goals as best they can given their information. There's no particular conflict there between theory and practice. And let me just mention this. If you say look at history, okay, let's look at history. We want peace over here, and if I want to play good football, then what do? I look at videos of the world champions in football, and I try to do what they do. If I want peace, I look at videos of the world champions of peace. Who is the world champion of peace? Switzerland, I think, okay? 400 years of 450 years of no war, okay? So I was hiking in Switzerland with a grandson a few years ago, and my grandson points up at the sky and he says, "What's that noise in the sky? What are those airplanes there?" So I say, those are fighter planes of the Swiss Air Force. So he says to me, "Fighter planes of the Swiss Air Force? Switzerland has been at peace for 450 years. Why do they need fighter planes?" So I say to him, "You know why Switzerland has been at peace for 450 years? It's because of those fighter planes." Okay. The runner-up to the Swiss are the world champions. The runner-up silver medal goes to the Romans. They had the Pax Romana, which lasted for 230 years, sometime in the beginning of the first millennium, AD. And their motto was, "Si vis pacem para bellum." which means if you want peace, prepare for war. So I think that's game theory, okay? And that's game theory and history together.
In the middle here. Lady in the red.
I wanted to ask, it sounds from what you were telling us tonight that really the end goal should be win-win, if possible. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I
The
can't.
end goal should be win-win. You said
The end goal should be win-win. Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So what happens in a situation where there's a win-lose situation that's been going on for a long time? What will be the motivation for the losing player to come back to the table and continue to play?
I didn't catch the question.
If there's a situation where for a long time it's been lose-win, what's the motivation of the losing player to keep coming back to the table if they keep losing?
Well, the motivation might be to stop losing. That's okay. The motivation might be to stop losing. Or the motivation might be to stop losing by playing differently. Okay, you could play differently. I think if you're losing, you might want to change course. Okay.
Okay, right at the back there.
Hi.
Can you stand up so Professor
sure.
Aumann can see you? Thank you. Right at the back.
A couple of questions. I hope they're relevant.
Let's go with just one at a time, okay?
Okay. I'd be really interested in your assessment of what's happening with game theory in mind, which is probably more complicated because instead of two actors, there are multiple between Israel and Iran, and with the proxy with the Hezbollah. I'd be really interested to hear what you'd have to say about that, game theory applied to that scenario as well.
Okay, that's the...
Okay.
So, how do you apply game theory to the situation between Israel, Iran, and Hezbollah?
Iran, Israel, and Hezbollah. I don't know. I don't know. I don't have a very smart answer to that question. Or even,
Would I be allowed to ask the second one then?
I'm not that familiar with it. You know, I don't read newspapers or look at television. I depend on my wife to tell me what's important.
Okay.
And she hasn't told me about those things.
Okay, do you want to ask your second question?
Thank you.
And can we have a mic over here?
Well, then,
Yeah,
from
I'm sorry.
From a completely different perspective, then, I'd be interested in hearing what you'd have to say on how perhaps the work of Daniel Kahneman, Amos Tversky, and more recently Richard Thaler, their work within behavioral economics in undermining the assumption of individual man's rationality, similar to the question that was asked before, but how has that influenced your idea of economics being a subject of incentives rather than things like nudge theory, which plays to people's irrationality to disincentivize them out of doing things that are wrong for them, as opposed to incentivizing them to do stuff? If that makes sense.
Well, I didn't catch the whole question, but I understood this, that you're asking about mainstream economics vis-a-vis behavioral economics, okay? Is that correct? Behavioral economics being represented by Kahneman and Tversky and Thaler and so on. Yes, right. That's the question, yes. And I have just completed a paper which is called which synthesizes behavioral economics and mainstream economics, okay? Behavioral economics, I'll say it very briefly, it's not really a subject which can be covered in 5 minutes, but I'll try. It's like the religion and science question. The effects that have been noted by the behavioral economists, mainly Kahneman and Tversky and Thaler and others, these effects are these effects of irrationality, apparent irrationality, occur in unusual situations. Kahneman and Tversky themselves acknowledge that the rules, the heuristics, the biases that are used in behavioral used in behavioral economics usually work well. They usually work well for the people who are using them. Sometimes they say they create systematic errors. Now, those systematic errors occur in unusual or contrived situations, and they do not occur in the usual situation. The usual situation, the heuristics of behavioral economics work well for the person using them. So they do not invalidate mainstream economics, because mainstream economics works about what happens in general. It doesn't work on what happens in each individual case. If you come to me afterwards, I'll give you my email. You can write to me and I'll send you the paper, which I just am working on now. Okay.
And then I'll test you on it later, okay? All right, we're going to take one last question, which we had. Who had the microphone? Over here, please.
It was Golda Meir who said, we'll have peace when they love their children more than they, hate ours. When the incentive is, as an expert on incentives, when the incentive is death across many of our enemies, how does one combat an incentive like that and undo it?
I didn't catch it.
Saying if they love death, if our enemies love death, and that's their incentive, how do you provide another incentive? Isn't it great to have someone who actually thinks about answering your question?
I think not all of them love death, but I think really the business of loving death is a product of indoctrination, of schooling, and is very deep-seated, and certainly this has to change. This should have been our first priority from the very beginning. I mentioned that, it should become a very important priority now. The incitement, the schooling in the territories, in the Palestinian Authority, has to change. Yes, this is something which is very, very important. And I think if you love death, there's not much that you can do about that. By the way, I think they love death for ideological reasons. I don't think it's something irrational, by the way. It's not irrational. They prefer. Many people are willing to sacrifice their lives for their ideologies. That in itself is not something irrational.
Join us on January the 15th Alice Shalvey, Professor Alice Shalvey will be here talking about her new autobiography. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Professor Yisrael Aumann.